All right, so today I wanted to talk about a couple interesting things that I've seen. The first one is from BNN Bloomberg saying 36% of young Canadian adults have given up on owning a home, RBC survey. Let's read a little bit about it here. Real estate prices in so many Canadian cities have climbed to all-time highs during the pandemic. So it should be no surprise that some Canadians appear ready to give up on homeownership dreams. According to a poll from the RBC released Monday, 36% of non-homeowners under the age of 40 have given up on ever buying a home. The bank polled more than 2,000 Canadians 18 and up, with 62% of respondents saying they'd expect the majority of people to be priced out of the market over the next decade. Challenging conditions due to increased demand and strained supply notwithstanding, 30% say they're still considering buying in the next 2 years, up 8% from RBC's 2020 spring housing poll. Historically low mortgage rates and continued economic uncertainty have created a lot of unknowns for home buyers, said Armeet, I don't know how you pronounce that, Vice President of the Home Equity Financing Products and Acquisitions at RBC, said in a release. In addition to evaluating what you can afford now, potential home buyers should put their finances through a stress test to see if they can continue to carry the cost of owning a home if interest rates increase or if they had an unexpected expense or income loss. The pandemic has provided an opportunity for many Canadians to grow their savings. I mean, what are you talking about there? I mean, the upper class, yeah, they've definitely grown their savings, but the middle class have just been killed for us. Again, I don't know what they're talking about there. Nearly half of survey respondents said their budget was under 500,000, according to the Canadian Real Estate Association. Average house price in Canada in February was $678,000. So, I mean, the one thing to point out when it comes to, that's obvious when it comes to the cost of housing is that it varies very greatly depending where you live. If you live in Toronto or Vancouver, you're looking at probably $1 million minimum to get a house. Well, I mean, unless it's something that's going to be very old and or tiny. But if you live in somewhere like Edmonton, Calgary, it's you can I mean you could get a very not a very nice house, but a pretty nice house for 678,000, right? Um, so again, like it really depends where you live. But again, the one thing I would point out is that Alberta is one of the most, if not the most, you know, affordable provinces to live. You look at Ontario, you look at the Maritimes, Quebec, they're, BC especially, they're quite a bit more expensive, right? So this is the other problem too. A lot of people see this and say, "Oh no, it's not that bad in my area." Well, here's the other thing to point out too is that um, it's still very bad if you look back. I mean, this is something I always bring up too, is that if you look back, 50, 60 years ago, what median income now is about what, 60,000 roughly? That means that, you have to save up, you know, about roughly 11 years of your income to buy a house if you wanted to buy it outright. Now, obviously, pretty well no one's going to do that, but the point being is that you have to save up 11 years worth of income. If you go back to the, 40s, 50s, even into the 60s, basically up until the 70s when things started to go up, you could buy a house on like a couple years income, right? So in other words, if housing prices had kept up with, how things were back then, the average house should be like 100 to 150,000 right now, or median income should be like 300,000 right now, right? So both of those things are completely insane. So what has happened, right? What has happened? Well, the government, right? At the end of the day, it's the government that has screwed most of this stuff up. I mean, what what has drove the cost of houses up, right? Like, let's just be honest about it. I don't, it just boggles my mind why people don't want to talk about this more. Regulation, I think that that's the most obvious one. The lockdowns, right? The lockdowns have, I mean, for obvious reasons, right? And that, the 2020, 2021 has been, I mean, look at the increases in real estate, right? So, the lockdowns have done it, right? In that, um, people still have to move, right? People still have to move. People are still looking to buy. The problem is that you have a lot of people that have had, eviction moratoriums, right? So people can't be evicted, right? And people say, oh, you can't kick people out of their house, they lost their job. Well, again, the problem is that we never should have locked down in the first place, right? That was the solution, right? So again, anyone making that argument, it's like, yeah, you can pretend you care if you want, but at the end of the day, you're still out to lunch. Um, but again, that's the first problem, right? And that the supply of new housing has gone down. And what's the other big problem? Well, the cost of building a house in the first place has gone way up, right? I mean, you look at the cost of lumber and other stuff, right? It's gone through the roof. So you have less people wanting to build. You have less, the traditional churn of new houses on the market has gone down. So again, what has happened? Well, of course the price is going to go up, right? And I mean, the other problems too is regulations, right? Like, I mean, regulations when it comes to building. Again, talk to anyone involved in construction, whether it's, basic construction, whether it's electrical, plumbing. Again, like literally, I mean, I know people in the industry too, and they talk about it all the time. It's like, I mean, one person even's like, I don't even like doing new houses because there's so much garbage regulations you have to follow and so much needless stuff you have to do. So again, that's one of the problems. Not to mention too, we have another one people really don't like to acknowledge, but is one that undoubtedly, whether you agree with it or not, is increasing the cost of housing, and that's mass immigration, especially in Canada. Well, I mean the States too, because our mass immigration is we're going to import people from the third world. The States, form of mass immigration is let's just leave the borders open. It's a little bit different, but at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same. And again, so again, like whether you agree with it, this is the other thing too that leftists just have such a terrible time with is that they think that because, oh, I agree with mass immigration, therefore, they're never going to criticize it, right? They're never going to question it. But again, it is undoubtedly increasing the cost of housing, right? Because we're bringing in more people than the supply of new housing can keep up with. So prices have to go up. Like it's not like none of this stuff is confusing, right? It's not confusing. And I see people try and debate this stuff all the time. It's like you're stupid, right? I mean, there's two kinds of people when it comes to this kind of stuff. There's the boomers who are the own the majority of real estate, right? And they don't want to see the price go down because that would hurt their net worth, right? That would hurt their bottom line. So again, they have a very clear incentive to not allow the price to go down. Um, so again, they're not going to call it out. But then there's also the stupid leftists that are like, they're suffering because of this too. It's the most hilarious thing. They're suffering because of this, right? It tends to be the more millennial or even younger than millennial types. Their solution is, oh, the government should just build, affordable housing. But again, that's still not a solution because the government's going to have to build the house at a loss, right? Because if the private sector could do it for not a loss, they would do it, right? So the government's going to have to tax, $1 million to build a. Well, I mean, they're not going to do. Let's just, better. They're going to have to tax $500,000 to build a condo or an apartment that's worth 400, right? So they just pissed away $100,000. So again, why would you support that? And not to mention too, when you have the whole low-income housing, or even if it's decent, decent quality housing, people don't treat it well. I mean, look at the Section 8 housing in the States. Right? This is the prime example of why this just government can just build it and just give it to people. It doesn't work, right? Because again, like if you have no responsibility, people treat these properties like garbage, right? So this is the other thing too, is that the government builds taxes $500,000 to build a $400,000 condo, and they just give it to someone. Who in the right mind would take care of it if they have no responsibility for it, right? So not only do they lose money building it, but they lose money with the upkeep. and they lose money on the resale value if they ever do sell it, right? So they lose money every step of the way. So that's not a solution, right? I mean, you can try it, but it's not going to work, right? It's not going to work in the long run. And it's just glorified rent control too, which doesn't work either, right? So the solution when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's very simple. The problem is people are too stupid, right? The boomers have a very clear, I mean, the boomers aren't stupid, they're just selfish, and the politicians are selfish in that, I mean, the politicians, and this isn't even a left-right thing necessarily, is that they have a very clear incentive to keep the prices of housing up, because the more your house is worth, well, the more you're going to pay in property taxes, right? So the government wants more tax revenue. I mean, it's probably more a left thing, but the right isn't really speaking up against any of this kind of stuff. So the problem is that nobody cares about the little guy at the end of the day. So um, the other thing I wanted to bring up too, which is another thing that's playing into this stuff, is debt, right? Debt. And this is the debt cost and this is just the interest, right? This is just the interest. This isn't the other, like, the actual debt per person is well into the tens of thousands. A lot of places I think it's even into the hundreds of thousands. It is when you include unfunded liabilities. But this is just the interest per year per person, right? I mean, you look at the provinces here. The worst one by far, Newfoundland, 2,600. You look at Quebec, the next worst, 1,400. Ontario, 1,375. New Brunswick, 1,376. Nova Scotia, 1,293. Same for PEI. Manitoba, 1,229. Saskatchewan, 1,151. Alberta and Saskatchewan, in between 1,000 and 1,100. So, um, and this is the thing too. Just imagine if the average person had an extra, what, about $1,200 Canadian in their pocket per year. That's $100 a month. And again, this number is for people who poo-poo that number. Number one, it kind of shows just how you got to be pretty well off to just poo-poo $100 a month, right? Um, but the point being is that, like, again, like, at the end of the day, I guess I just, it just boggles my mind why people don't want to talk about this more. And the point would also be that I have to bring up is that this number is constantly going up, right? This number is literally going up every single day, right? Why is no one, again, people, when we talk about the cost of housing being so basically the cost of everything these days being so unaffordable, okay, well, just imagine if we didn't have all this debt to deal with, right? And part of the reason why this stuff's so expensive too is debt, right? And that, I mean, debt allows people to buy stuff that they can't buy, right? Now, here's the thing. The other problem too is that if you're young, you kind of need, you need a mortgage. You need to be able to put very little money down, right? Um, you know, so again, like, at the end of the day, if people want this stuff to get better, like, I mean, I think everybody wants this stuff to get, well, not everybody, to be honest. I think that most people want this stuff to get better. The problem is people need to set aside their biases for starters, because again, when people just can't let their biases go. And the other thing too is people need to set political biases away too, because again, at the end of the day, this stuff isn't really political. But, well, I mean, to be honest, the solutions are kind of political. But again, like, if we want this stuff to get better, we have to first acknowledge the problem. And that's the first thing too, is that everybody points out the problem, but no one wants to acknowledge it. Like, nobody wants to get uncomfortable. And that's the fundamental problem here. And the other thing too is that, again, like, there's only so many, like, a lot of people deserve no sympathy. Like, I've pointed this out a lot too, but a lot of people deserve no sympathy. Like, if you're one of these people that has supported lockdowns and supports all these regulations and supports mass immigration, it's like, I don't really care. Right? I don't really care about you, and you deserve no sympathy. But for the people that do recognize the truth here, it's like, we got to do something about this. Like, we really have to do something about this. And there's nothing the government is going to do to solve this problem, because if there was something the government could do, they would do it by now. Right? Like I say, this whole government just build free housing for people, it's not the solution, right? It's obviously not the solution. There's no possible way it would work. So again, what's the solution? Well, like I said, we need to deregulate, stop making it so burdensome to build a house, both for everybody involved. We need to cut immigration, preferably to zero, but that thing that's probably not going to happen. I mean, end this insanity when it comes to lockdowns. Um, I mean, mortgage rates are another. Again, I'm not super knowledgeable. I mean, definitely more knowledgeable than the average person, but not super knowledgeable when it comes to that. But the one thing when it comes to mortgages too is, um, if the rates go up, well, that's going to bring down the cost of housing. So I mean, rates probably have to go up, right? That's something that I think needs to happen. But um, again, I think that there's a lot of other stuff when it goes into that as well. But at the end of the day, like, people want this stuff to be this way. Again, people wonder why it's this way. Well, people want it to be this way, right? Majority of people don't want mass immigration, but the majority of people wouldn't speak up publicly condemning mass immigration, not condemning, but being against mass immigration, right? People need to speak up against lockdowns. People need to speak up against all of this kind of stuff. And the other thing too is that part of the reason why the cost of things has gone up so much, like I brought up in the earlier video today, um, people aren't working. People aren't working, but they're still getting paid. So what happens when people aren't working, but they're still getting paid? Well, the cost of stuff has to go up because less stuff is getting produced, right? It's the example that it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it still proves the point, is that would you rather live how you're currently living, or would you rather be dropped on a deserted island with no internet, no electricity, no technology, but $1 billion, right? Well, you still choose the life you have, because money is meaningless if you can't use it for anything, right? And this is the thing people bring up is, oh, well, we're gonna, what is it, like, we're paying people whatever, like, what is it, 2,000 a month or whatever it is, to not work. It's like that money's meaningless if it can't buy anything. Like, it's completely meaningless. But again, what is the average person's solution when they hear that? It's, oh, well, let's just give people 2,500 or give people 3,000. Then the exact same pattern repeats. The price of goods and services just goes up to compensate for that, right? So, you know, the solutions to these problems are they're really not that hard. People like to think that there's all this confusion, or, oh, it's not that simple. Well, yeah, there's no perfect solution. I would acknowledge that. But the one thing that, if people aren't willing to acknowledge that doing what we're doing is not working, and maybe trying the opposite would be worth it for once, like, again, like, doing what we're doing is not working. It's blatantly obvious. The problem is that most people seem to think that, oh, it's because we didn't do enough, right? We don't have enough regulations, right? We don't have enough rent control. We don't have enough immigration. Like, it's just complete madness. So, and again, when it comes to the debt too, like, this is a very interesting point that people need to understand. This is just the interest. This is the amount of money, and this, not to mention too, this is per person, right? So this is including kids. This is included people who are retired. So if you look at people who are actually working, the number is probably double or triple that, right? So again, if you are a, you're a couple with two kids, you're paying around $5,000 per year just to cover the interest of the federal and provincial debt. Like, again, like, we are literally taking $5,000 per year. We're not directly taking it, but we're taking it through inflation, and we're taking it through taxation. We're literally taking $5,000 per year from the average couple with two kids. Who in the right mind does not hear that and think that is completely asinine? Why are we doing that? Most people apparently, right? Most people. So again, like at the end of the day, you can only, and not to mention too, you can only care so much about people. That's why when I said I really don't care about the people who support this stuff and are priced out of the market, like for the millennials and the ones which one's the one that's even younger than millennials? I forget. Um, the ones that support this stuff, it's like, yeah, I really don't care. You're supporting your own demise, right? So anyway, that's what I wanted to bring up today. If you like the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Check out those links below. Follow me on those other platforms. If you want to donate, you can do that as well. I would very much appreciate whatever support I can get. But like I say, check out those links and stay tuned for more.